Hello, bonjour. Welcome to the Union Safety Net, le filet de sécurité syndicale, a union podcast for working people. I'm your host, Sébastien Bezeau, et oui, parfois en français aussi. This podcast is hosted by the Union of Safety and Justice Employees, le syndicat des employés de la sécurité et de la justice. Join us for an informative discussion every month about issues currently affecting working people. Welcome to the Union Safety Net's Election 2025 series. This year, Canadians will be going to the polls and will decide which 338 people will represent them in the 45th Federal Parliament. This election will usher in a new era. As a public safety union, USGE has identified some crucial policy priorities that would ensure federal public safety personnel are able to fulfill their mandate of protecting the safety and security of Canadians. At the same time, USGE also recognizes that this election has quickly become one of how to manage our long-standing relationship with the United States in an increasingly complex time given the Trump presidency and an unprecedented time in U.S.-Canada relations. Given the importance of this election, USGE has extended an invitation to the leaders of all federal parties in the House to discuss some of the issues that are top of mind for USGE's membership and the labor movement more generally. The interviews will be conducted in both official languages, and today we are speaking with NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Monsieur Singh, bienvenue au filet de sécurité syndicale.
Merci, je suis tellement honoré d'avoir cette occasion de partager quelques idées avec vous, répondre à vos questions. Et c'est vraiment un honneur de faire votre connaissance, Sébastien.
Oui, plaisir. Alors, on est vraiment excités de parler de différents sujets, so let's get right into it. We'll talk about a few different topics.
Love it.
Number one.
Yes.
State of policing.
Okay.
As you know, USG represents nearly 20,000 public safety employees working in 18 federal departments and agencies, including several thousands of public service employees in the RCMP, the Correctional Service of Canada, and the Departments of Public Safety, Justice, among others. USGE has been paying close attention to how some provinces wish to sever their ties with the RCMP and establish provincially operated police forces, even though the federal government subsidizes the provision of the RCMP services throughout the country. For many public service employees, this could have a major impact. We also know that Canadians are very concerned about crime in general. So, can you comment on the current state of policing and the biggest issues facing the criminal justice system from your perspective?
Well, people should be safe in their communities. I think it's a starting point. People should feel safe when they go to work, when they ride public transit, no matter where they live in the country, people should be safe. And I want to do everything I can to encourage that. So part of safety is having the people on the ground, real boots on the ground, as they say, people on the ground that are actually providing that service of keeping people safe. I know in contrast, just so we can make the comparison, under Stephen Harper, when Pierre Poilievre was a part of that government in cabinet, they did some big cuts to the RCMP, and those cuts had lasting impacts. I really believe in supporting workers. I look at everyone that provides a service to our country as workers. All public safety workers, RCMP, and others are all workers. And as a party that was founded by workers, we want to make sure that they're supported. They have the resources that they need to do the work we ask of them, the equipment they need, the support staff, that full complement is needed to be able to do the work they do. So I think we've got to make sure we've got appropriate levels of funding for the folks that do the important work. And then we also have to look at things that are going on. We know that in terms of crime, communities are worried about a lot of car thefts are becoming a serious concern.
Yeah.
We know that people are worried about illegal handguns and drugs coming in from the States. So the more we can do to protect our borders from those illegal materials coming in, the more we can do to crack down on the specific areas of concern people have, like car thefts. What I've been saying for car thefts, we need to have more folks that are patrolling the ports where these vehicles are often exported to deter that from happening, to show, it's not going to be an easy buck. We also know that the manufacturers have to do a better job of making their cars more secure. So overall, I want to support the workers, and we know that we need to keep Canadians safe. And the way we do that is by supporting the men and women that serve in keeping our community safe.
Right. Well, keeping in that line, let's one more stab at the state of policing. So what are your thoughts on maintaining the role of the RCMP throughout the country?
Ultimately, it's a decision that communities are going to make. But you mentioned one thing that I think really stands out for me. A lot of provinces and municipalities have experienced a lot of downloading, where more and more of the costs go on to cities that experience it the most, where the costs fall on the city. And policing is a very big expense for the city.
Yeah.
And it is better when a higher level of government, which has better sources of revenue, is the one that's actually compensating for it. So that general principle I want to see more of. Instead of putting more responsibilities on municipalities that can't afford it, they can't afford sometimes the big expenses, and policing is an important expense and it's a big one. So I prefer seeing higher levels of government step up and provide supports that way to lessen the burden and to provide more of the funding so that cities and municipalities can deliver things like the libraries and the maintenance of parks and the other responsibilities they've got to deliver, community centers and the services they deliver. So they can focus on those things and not have to also have these big budgetary pressures on them.
Because they do provide a lot of public services to the citizens,
That's
right? So let's talk about public safety personnel and their mental health. So federal public safety personnel experience higher rates of job stress given their work in the public safety realm, which can contribute to mental health and occupational stress injuries. Now, USG's members regularly interact with violent criminals, traumatic and or graphic materials, as well as have exposure to incidents that can lead to post-traumatic stress and related injuries. So despite this, sadly, they are often denied workers' compensation for mental health-related injuries. So what measures would your party take to protect the mental health of federal public safety personnel who work in policing and the criminal justice system and ensure they are not suffering in silence?
Well, there's a lot of stigma. If we talk about the cultural side of it, there's a lot of stigma around mental health, and people don't talk about it enough and talk about how they're feeling when it comes to the mental health. So I think culturally, society-wise, we got to make it easier for people to talk about that. My responsibility at the federal level as Prime Minister would be, when we talk about supporting workers, means making sure they've got the good pay that they deserve for the work they do, the benefits that they need to be able to do their work to do and be supported, the resources. And part of that resources and support is mental health supports. And often those get neglected. So there's not a lot of access to the mental health, the trauma-informed supports. You mentioned trauma. Our public safety workers, like you mentioned, are dealing with a lot of difficult things. And there's a lot of opportunity where they're going to be faced with PTSD or other forms of trauma. And we have to acknowledge that as a part of the work that these workers do. And we have to make sure that they get the supports they need. So for me, our healthcare system should have always included mental health as a part of it. It's not really treated the same way. Like if you have an illness, if you've got you need a serious surgery, you get care. But if you've got a mental health challenge, it's not treated in that same way. It's not given the same respect. I think that's one, wrong, and two, we have to remedy that.
Okay, well, we'll take it one step further. Would you consider amending federal legislation so that more federal public safety personnel have access to presumptive injury coverage?
Yes, absolutely. We've talked a lot about this for different professions, that if we change legislation that acknowledges that these are the type of injuries that these workers can sustain, that it makes it easier for them to get the supports they need instead of having to fight for it and prove it. We can actually presumptively say, hey, you're in a certain line of work. It is understandable that you're going to experience, sadly, mental health or trauma impacts. And so let's ensure that we are more supportive of the workers that we know are faced with these things, and that is a reality of their work. And our job should be to make sure that they get the supports they need. And so making some of these presumptive so that workers don't have to fight tooth and nail just to get coverage is one way of showing respect to these workers.
Yeah, and to our listeners, if you're new to the Union Safety Net, one of our first episodes was about presumptive injury coverage.
Right.
So we invite our listeners to take a listen to that. So let's switch gear, Jagmeet. Let's go into hybrid work.
Sure.
So as you're aware, tens of thousands of federal public service employees worked virtually during the pandemic and beyond, largely from home or through federal co-working spaces. But last May, the Treasury Board moved to severely limit hybrid work options for federal employees, despite the fact that they demonstrated over multiple years that they can be equally, if not more productive, working virtually. So the decisions of the Treasury Board have been met with a lot of opposition by the labor movement and public service employees. What would your approach be?
Well, from the beginning, if we recall what happened, the Prime Minister and the Liberal government promised to work with the unions and the workers to come up with a deal on this. And they made that commitment, and they broke that commitment ultimately, which is wrong. So first of all, on a principle note, anytime you're in communication with or you're negotiating with workers, you got to follow through on your word. My commitment is we would always work with the unions, work with the leadership to come to any agreement around work conditions. When it comes to working remotely, though, if the work gets done, I don't see the problem. Like if the work can get done, if the work is being done at the quality that we need, and the workers are better quality of life, being able to have some flexibility, why wouldn't we keep that option on the table for them? So ultimately, this is something that has to be negotiated in a respectful manner with the workers. It can't be something that we unilaterally decide. And that's what the current government did, and I think is wrong.
Well, we have you here on record at the Union Safety Net that you will discuss it with the unions. So there you go.
There you go. Work together.
Let's take it one more step further. Would you reconsider the current return to the office policies?
Yeah, I think it was done in a wrong way, and it shouldn't have been imposed in the way it was. It wasn't done with negotiation. It wasn't something that was talked about, and it wasn't something that was worked out with the workers themselves. And that's the only way. Like I'm proudly a part of a party that was founded by unions, founded by workers. And what we believe in is collective bargaining, the right to negotiate. And if we have to come up with solutions, it should be done together, working it out on the table, not unilaterally making a decision that doesn't include the input of workers, especially when there's a commitment to do that.
Right. Okay, let's change topic. Let's talk about investment in public safety personnel. Public safety will inevitably remain high on the list of priorities for Canadians in any economic climate. USGE is very concerned that the current deficit-cutting measures, like previous ones before it in 2014 and 2015, will have long-standing impacts on public safety personnel. What we know from previous deficit-cutting exercises is that workloads and workplace stress increase significantly and still have not recovered. So as such, what would you do to enhance public safety operations and ensure federal public safety personnel have the necessary resources and capacity to keep Canadians safe and secure?
Very important question, and something I think is on the minds of a lot of people. People are worried about a deficit, understandably, but there's two ways to approach a deficit. One is to cut, and the other one is to look at revenues. But we only hear the cut side from conservatives. We only hear the cut side now from Mark Carney, from the Liberals. They're talking about cutting operating budgets. We know what that means. When you cut operating budgets, it means cut to services. It's going to mean cuts that are going to hurt these workers. We have said we should never be looking at cutting the services that we need to deliver the essential things that people require. Public safety is always going to be something that's essentially important. And our approach is to look at revenue, how we can increase our revenue, and to look at wasteful things. Instead of cutting services that people need and that our community needs to stay safe, we would cut things like the use of private consultants, which recently tallied in the tens of billions of dollars being used for outside consultants that the public service could have done, work that the public service could have and should have done, but it's outsourced to these consulting firms that charge hundreds of millions of dollars for contracts, and it totaled billions of dollars of money spent. These are things that I would cut. Let's not waste money there and instead keep our service levels high, keep the supports in place for workers. And so it is an important decision that people are going to have to make. While we know we've got a serious deficit, what is your approach to dealing with it? Do you believe in cutting services? That's going to hurt workers. It's going to hurt Canadians, of course. Cut the services, both the workers are going to feel it and the people that need those services to keep our community safe are going to feel it. Or do you think we should be looking at ways of increasing revenue, so making the super rich contribute their fair share, and looking at ways that we can stop wasting things that we saw happen under previous governments, which is hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on private consultants for work that the public service could have done.
Right. And I mean, our last episode of the Union Safety Net, we spoke with the national president of the Canada Employment Immigration Union. And she spoke to us because there was actually 3,300 jobs that were cut from her union members that she's representing. And one of the highlights that I always remember when she was talking to me is the cuts affect the most vulnerable.
Yes.
And they do, right?
They do.
So it's interesting that you say it's either cuts or we change the revenue. So there's like these two parts that are intertwined.
Yeah. And also there's things that we can cut without cutting services. And I'm being very clear. Well, Mark Carney said operating budgets. That means services. And Pierre Poilievre has directly said he would cut public sector workers like previous conservative governments have done. And it's directly hit public safety workers. I'm saying there's got to be a different way. And the different way is increase revenues and look at other wasteful spending that we can cut, like the outside consultants.
Okay, well, the tougher questions on how you increase revenue and cuts the other thing, we'll leave that for the debate stage.
Sure.
Let's talk about North America.
Sure.
The Trump presidency has clearly upended the stable relationship that Canada has enjoyed with the U.S. over many decades.
Yes.
The various announcements coming out of Washington have created a lot of anxiety among Canadians, including working Canadians in the labor movement. But many say that the key ballot question is who can best manage the relationship with the White House? What would you do to protect unionized jobs in sectors that could be affected by present and future tariffs, among other measures?
Oh, great question. This is really a question of our values. If our values as Canadian is to defend what makes us unique, defend what makes us Canadian, I'm in the best position to defend that. One of the values that we have is healthcare, for example. Healthcare, we want to keep it Canadian. When the US and Donald Trump and Elon Musk talk about making us the 51st state, when they talk about threats to our putting economic pressure on us to attack our sovereignty, they're talking about making us more like the US. Well, what would make us more like the US? A US healthcare system. A U.S. healthcare system is one where you got to pay out of pocket for everything. Mm-hmm. One where a simple illness, not even an illness, even going to deliver a baby, results in people going bankrupt. People go bankrupt for healthcare again and again in the States. Leading cause of bankruptcy. In Canada, the only thing you have to worry about is maybe paying for parking when you go to the hospital. And
we get upset.
Yeah, and we got to improve that too. We got to improve our healthcare in general. But yeah, we have something really special. We got to defend it. We've seen already that Poilievre, for example, wants to cut healthcare, and that's going to make it more costly, make it private. People got to pay money out of pocket. And the Conservatives are openly talking about it. The Liberals really didn't do that much to defend our healthcare system. They kind of in Ontario, they let Doug Ford privatize. They let Daniel Smith sell off our public hospitals to a private corporation. So they're not really standing up to defend it. I'm going to defend what makes us Canadian, our healthcare, taking care of our neighbors. And then we talk about unionized workers. Well, that's going to be a fight. We can't please Donald Trump. We know that he can't be pleased. He keeps on changing the goalposts. He's not someone that can be reasoned with. He is someone that's being an economic bully, so we have to fight back. And if we want to fight back to defend our Canadian values, fight back to defend unionized jobs, fight back to defend Canadian healthcare that's public and universal, that's me. I'm the one that's going to fight back for that. The decisions that we've seen coming out of Mark Carney for the Liberals is one that he wants to defend the CEOs. He wants to help out the billionaires. He wants to help out his rich friends. Same with Pierre Poilievre. He's not interested in protecting unionized jobs. He's been opposed to unionized jobs and opposed to unions since he began his political career. So he's not going to be the one that's going to defend unionized workers. I want supports in place that put workers first. If we put any money on the table to help impacted sectors, so aluminum and steel sectors right now are experiencing tariffs, I would put in targeted supports to help out those workers. But more importantly, I would find ways for us to build more in Canada so we create jobs that are less reliant on the United States. We can't be reliant on them. We were good neighbors.
Right.
And we did our part, but now we can't count on them anymore. So we've got to build a Canada and an economy that's less dependent and reliant on the U.S.
It's sad that we can't count on them anymore, though, right?
It is, right? Because, we were good neighbors, right? We were like, we're going to build something together. We're going to build an economy together. But now we realize the vulnerability that left us. As soon as that partner became a bad partner, we were left very dependent on them.
Right.
We've got to change that now.
Yeah. And for our podcast listeners, because you can't see this podcast, but just so you know, as I was reading the question, Mr. Singh, Jagmeet was moving his microphone, getting all comfortable because he was getting worked up and passionate about this topic. You can tell it means a lot to him.
Yeah, no, I care deeply.
But check on our YouTube if you want to see that. Last question for you, Jagmeet, and this is going to be a special one near and dear to your heart, I'm sure. Commitment as the next prime minister. What are you most proud of in your time as leader? And what can Canadians expect if you succeed in the next election?
I'm most proud that we used our power to get things done for people. And it's proof of what we do. So if you look at what we did with our power, We got dental care for seniors and for kids. Right now, 1.5 million people in our country were able to go to the dentist, often for the first time in their life, because we fought for that. We forced that to happen. We brought in laws that protect workers, anti-SCAB legislation that really supports working people. We brought in law and funding for pharmacare, the first steps of a universal pharmacare system. So if you look at what we did, everything that we used our power for benefited working people, benefited families, benefited everyday folks. So moving forward, you can count on me when I say, I want to make life more affordable. I've shown you what I can do with 25 MPs. Imagine what I could do if you entrust me with the important role of being prime minister. Imagine what I could do as a worker first prime minister, putting workers first, putting people first every single day. Imagine what kind of Canada we could build. That's what I want people to imagine when I say we could build a healthcare system that's there for you. We could support public sector workers. We could be respectful in negotiating deals, not forcing deals. We could make the price of our daily necessities lower. We've talked about imposing a price cap on these big corporate grocery stores when it comes to food essentials to bring down those prices. Building homes for families, for workers, not for investors to get rich. Investing in solutions that actually put the people first, not the billionaires first. I think there's a lot of ways we can make life better, and I'm committed to that. So as Prime Minister, that's what I would do.
Perfect. Well, Mr. Singh, let's switch it up to our francophones in the country.
Yeah.
Here. Alors, on a parlé beaucoup de différents sujets en anglais. Avez-vous un message spécifique pour nos auditeurs et auditrices francophones?
Oui, premièrement, je veux saluer mon ami ici, Sébastien, un Acadien. C'est tellement une fierté du Canada qu'on ait des communautés francophones diverses. Et pour moi, comme vous pouvez peut-être entendre, je suis pas un francophone, mais je suis un francophile. J'adore la langue française. Donc, je pense que c'est aussi une force de notre pays, le fait qu'on ait un pays bilingue. Et on doit défendre cette culture. Ça prend des lois, ça prend des politiques pour vraiment protéger la langue française au niveau fédéral et pour protéger le bilinguisme. Donc, ça, c'est quelque chose d'important pour moi. Deuxièmement, les mêmes choses qui sont des grands enjeux dans la vie des gens pour les gens qui ne sont pas francophones.
Ouais.
Le coût de la vie, le coût du logement, le coût d'épicerie. Mon engagement, c'est regarder ce que j'ai fait avec le pouvoir que vous m'avez donné. Le fait que dans un gouvernement minoritaire, on a mis en œuvre un programme de soins dentaires. On a créé un projet de loi pour l'assurance médicaments et le financement pour commencer avec les médicaments pour les diabètes, les gens diabétiques. Ouais. Et puis, on a mis en œuvre aussi une loi anti-mesures de grève qui protège les travailleurs. Donc, on a montré ce qu'on fait avec le pouvoir. On aide les gens. Ouais. Donc, mon message, c'est si vous me donnez une occasion comme Premier ministre, je serai un Premier ministre pour les travailleurs, pour les gens, pas pour les milliardaires, pas pour les PDG, mais pour vous. Et je m'engage de toujours prioriser vous, les gens, les travailleurs, avec chaque décision. Et imaginez ce qu'on peut faire si on a un gouvernement qui cible les priorités des gens chaque jour. Je pense qu'on peut créer quelque chose d'incroyable.
Jagmeet, is there anything you'd like to add to this interview?
Yeah, one last thing I wanted to shout out. We got two presidents that I got to meet on the way in, President David and Rubina, who represent some of these incredible workers that we've been talking about today. So just want to shout them out.
Incroyable. Well, leader of Canada's NDP, Jagmeet Singh, it was a real pleasure to have you on the Union Safety Net. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Union Safety Net, le filet de sécurité syndicale, a union podcast created by USJE for working people. If you have any feedback on today's episode or would like to suggest a topic you want us to cover, please reach out on social media platforms. We love to hear from our listeners. I'm your host, Sébastien Bezeau, and I hope you'll join us next month for another episode of the Union Safety Net, le filet de sécurité syndicale.